And this session, I hope, builds on the discussion that was beginning in the previous session. And it's based on what I always used to ask my PhD students in their first tutor session, which is, when you finish your PhD, if everything you have written is true, so what? So we've had a conference, and someone said this morning, a conference feels inadequate to the moment. So we need to have something that emerges from this conference that can help us frame and shape the work of the Britain-Palestine project over the next year or so. You had a draft on your table in front of you when you arrived this morning of some action points, and they've been added to in the discussion over the course of the day. New things have come up. What we undertake to do as a project, as a team, is to consider everything that's been said today and to build it into our action plan. But our approach at the Britain-Palestine project is practical. We are based on historical responsibility, forming a contemporary driver for Britain to have an active role in policy terms. We're driven by international law. And in the end, we are driven by what is the art of the possible. And that's about politics. So what we need in our action plan, if as a small charity we are to have any kind of impact, is what will influence the Labour government to move further. The ambassador, in his very diplomatic way, implied there had been some steps forward. I would say they were baby steps, but how do we work on this government to be a government that makes strides that go forward? We know they're capable of political leadership and political will. They formed a consensus to provide massive humanitarian and even more massive military aid. They created a massive war crimes investigation department, which Raji mentioned. And they have helped with a huge array of technical assistance. All of this was in Ukraine since the full-scale invasion by Russia. If they can do it in Ukraine, they can do much more in Palestine. The question is what that should be. Now, you've met two of our panel already. We're joined by an Italian-Palestinian academic, Zahira, who wrote an essay in the Financial Times magazine, which I'd urge you all to look up, which was called Outing Myself as a Palestinian. Yeah. And about the importance of race, inclusion, identity in thinking about the Palestinian issue, and particularly in the way it plays out in Western politics. And Victor, who wrote one of the canonical books on the history of international law as it relates to the Arab-Israeli conflict from 1891 to 1949, and has in recent years put the crime of apartheid in an academic and legal and political context for its application to the Israel-Palestine conflict. And what I'm going to ask each of the panel to do is answer that exam question. What more should the UK be doing in the current situation? And then we're going to open up to the floor for discussion and debate to help us shape and improve our action plan and what we do over the next year. And as you've just heard from Raji and Dalal, I'm going to start at the far end. I'm going to start with Zahira to go first. Is that mic dead? Yes. Oh, okay. I don't trust that mic. You don't trust that?
I don't trust the mic, and I want to bring the conversation to trust. So, differently from my very esteemed colleague, a lawyer or an international lawyer, diplomat, another lawyer, I'm a social psychologist. And I'm a social psychologist, and I used to be an investment banker for a long time in my previous career. My father is a 1967 exiled Palestinian, which means that he was studying as a student in Italy when he was 20, in his 20s, And the 6 Days War happened, and I was locked out, and he was locked out forever. He was not in the census that would have given him the right to return. For many years, growing up in Italy and also having done such a corporate career, I was at JP Morgan and Barclays for a very long time, and I'm ashamed to saying it, I hid my Palestinian identity. It's not that I hid it because I was not proud. I mean, being Palestinian is the honor of my life. But I hid it because it's a stigmatized identity. It's an identity which in the West is loaded with prejudice. And when people would ask me, where are you from? I'd say, my name is Arabic. Therefore, as Brian was mentioning, as the bombing of Gaza, and Gaza is our zenith, as the bombing of Gaza was becoming bigger and bigger, I'm not talking 2023, I'm talking about the 2014, the 2021, I started to explode inside because I had to speak as Palestinian. And luckily, now I was an academic, freedom of speech. And so I started to speak very, very openly about it. And I wrote this essay, which plays on the, on the game of, the LGBTQ. So I said, coming out as Palestinian. So I came out as Palestinian very publicly, and I spoke of the pain that I was carrying inside. And that changed my life because I had hundreds of people like me in the diaspora writing to me from Canada, from the US, from the UK, and telling me things like, you've crawled under my skin and wrote with my hands, you are speaking my voice. It was an incredibly emotional moment and completely changed the direction of my life. And I am an incredible advocate for Palestine. I was before, but now I'm very publicly. But what I started to develop from that occasion is this idea of racialization. Because as Palestinians, we are not the one to carry a stigmatized identity. Natives carry a stigmatized identity. People who are colonized carry a stigmatized identity. And as social psychology, I started to look into the literature about racism. And I found, for example, Black feminists speaking my voice of oppressed Palestinian women. And therefore, I started to explore more and more the idea of anti-Palestinian racism. And we have a literature. We have a literature that speaks about anti-Palestinian racism. It's a very small starting literature. There is one particular paper by two Canadian academics, Jasmine Abulaban and Abigail Bakan, from Palestinian experience and Jewish experience, who write a paper about the Palestinian racialization and the Palestinian gaslighting. Because what's happening is we are gaslighted, we are victim blamed. So all the things that are happening to us in the West, the dehumanization that we see of Palestinians in the West, is a psychological process of racialization, which means that in a hierarchy of humans, we are placed at the bottom. We are placed at the bottom of everyone all the time. And that's why Palestinian life is so cheap. Because it is true that in people's mind, it does not count as much as any other life. We are racialized. And therefore, I want to write something that our beloved Churchill said in 1937. And I know that Victor knows it too, because he put it in his dissertation, his PhD dissertation many years ago. So during the Peel Commission in 1937, the Peel Commission is one of, was called the Palestine Commission, and it was the commission in which they decided about the partition, effectively. Lord Peel, who frankly was actually a fair man, asks in a secret conversation, which was hidden until 10 years ago, asks Churchill, what do you think is the role of England here? Because in 1937, there were huge acrimonious battles between the Jews invading and being, invading and taking the land, and the Arabs, the Palestinians, clearly fighting back, as one would do when one comes into your house to take your land. And Churchill said, I do not admit that the dog in the manger has the final right to the manger, even though he might have lain in there for a long time. I do not admit that right. Do not admit, for instance, that a great wrong has been done to the Red Indians of America or to the black people of Australia. I do not admit that a wrong has been done to those people by the fact that a stronger race, or at any rate, a more worldly wise race, to put it that way, has come in and taken their place. I do not admit it. I do not think that the Red Indians had any right to stay. We are still in 1937. We are still in 1937. 100 years later, we are still in 1937. So, what do we do from here? I don't think it's enough just to rely on international law or on diplomacy. We need to activate ourselves on the front of other literatures, other way of thinking about ourselves. We need to start conceptualizing how are we dehumanized, putting it in categories. That's what academics do. So I have read all the literature on anti-Palestinian races, and I've done a little introductory review to anti-Palestinian races, which you can find under my name in my website at the University of Sussex. And I have found 3 categories that we could broadly define as categories of racialization of the Palestinians. And this morning I was at University of Westminster speaking about this in an anti-race conference. I was amongst black people, and there were also some Jews who are also racialized through anti-Semitism by the same hierarchization which comes from white Christian supremacy. I have a lot of anti-Zionist Jews and who actually write about this. Rachel Shabi wrote a book on Off-White, who actually speaks about this conjoined destiny. Anyway, so 3 categories I would like you to take away, and 3 categories that we need to verbalize ourselves. One is the denial of Palestinian existence. This still happens today, continuously. Palestinians do not exist. They've been invented, stuff like this. It exists. The second one, the denial of Palestinian suffering. How does this manifest itself? Well, it manifests itself by ignoring what's happening in Gaza, but it manifests itself in a very subtle way, in the language that it's chosen to speak about a Palestinian who miraculously dies and an Israeli who is killed. You see, if we start to understand the categories, we can now point it, we can spot it wherever it is. And the last category is the most toxic of them all. And it's the one that defines every Palestinian, by definition, as anti-Jew, and therefore as anti-Semite, or as a terrorist. And this happens all the times. And this is the stigmatization of the Palestinian identity. I could bring you so many examples. I'm writing a book about this. The last thing that I want to say is, therefore, by the way, this morning at the University of Westminster, as I stopped talking about this, one very aggressive Zionist stood up and started to take the stage and to ask me about terrorism, which clearly I don't have any answer about. Why should I know about terrorism? It's not my subject, right? I mean, what on earth? Anyway, so it went on for 7 minutes. I even recorded her, and it was possibly the most violent, harassment I've received in public. But what happened afterwards is even more incredible. The VC of the university came and assisted me and took me to a cafe, and all the black people came around me and supported me. So if we discover the language of racism, we can speak ourselves, and Palestinians are too proud to think even that they're racialized. We are so proud. I mean, initially I was thinking, I don't want to speak like myself like that. I mean, we're Palestinian, for goodness sake. We'd withstand this. No, let's say things as they are. So I think that if we want to go into negotiation, we need to rebuild trust. I am incredibly grateful to the British Palestinian Project for inviting me today. I want to believe in the British democratic process and justice. But I also know that some Palestinians did not want to come to this conference, and they do not believe anymore, neither in this organization or in the democratic process. And I'm saying this in pain. So we need to rebuild trust. We are missing the trust between the political parties and the Palestinians. I endorse the strategic optimism of my colleagues. I am strategically optimist, and I will fight until my death to have Palestine recognized. But we also need to be incredibly shrewd at understanding what are the psychological racializing process behind us, and therefore I think that we need an inquiry on this, and we have enough material to start it. That's what we need.
Thank you. Victor.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank Vincent Fien for his role in all the work that you've done for Palestine since your retirement. I first met Vincent Fien when I was a legal advisor to the Palestinian Negotiation Affairs Department in Ramallah when Vincent was the Consul General in Jerusalem. So I very much identify with what Zahira has said, partly because I'm a diaspora Palestinian, like Zahira is. My mother's English from the north of the UK, and my father's Palestinian from Bethlehem originally. And I suppose that heritage also explains why I wrote my first book on the British Mandate, trying to understand the role of law, the role of UK policy in the modern conflict, because this conflict has a history that started long before the 7th of October. And I want to link what I'm about to say. I will briefly go over the mandate to link it to why the UK has a special responsibility, more so than any other state. And that's because it was a direct result of UK policy during the mandate that the Palestinian national movement was suppressed. So they were not allowed to attend the Paris Peace Conference at the end of the First World War. The members from the Zionist organization were invited, members from the Hashemite dynasty, but not those Palestinians who had been high-level officials under the Ottoman Empire, who had been elected, who had representation in the Ottoman legislature in Istanbul. They were not invited. And when they tried to organize political movements to demand independence, they were violently suppressed. And there was no, as we've heard, the rule of law is an important word we keep hearing. But as earlier speakers have said, including Michael Safard and others, during the mandate and during, which has been continued by the current state of Israel, it's rule by law, not rule of law. The rule of law, the rule by law is when law is used to dominate and oppress. As Michael Safard said, the law can be exploited to do bad things, and the law was exploited to do very bad things in the 1930s and 40s through the defense emergency regulations, which also included what they call ouster clauses, ousting the jurisdiction of the UK courts to be able to look at UK policy. So it was impossible to challenge the policy of establishing a Jewish national home politically or legally during the mandate. And that was one of the reasons we had the Peel Commission, which ended up suggesting that they needed to establish two states, because the dual obligation to the Jewish agency and to the Palestinians was incompatible. And it's interesting to know that the defense emergency regulations, which were adopted in the 1930s, are still used today by the State of Israel to justify the demolition of Palestinian homes, particularly in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. And as the International Court of Justice noted in its recent advisory opinion, this law has never been used to demolish illegal Jewish homes or settlements. And therefore, the court said this is inherently and systemically discriminatory. It's a very strong language from the court on this issue. The UK is also responsible, not just morally, but I would argue legally responsible, for an incident that occurred at the end of the mandate, which I don't know how well it's known. Perhaps it's well known to scholars and those who are well read on this history. But after the UN partition plan was adopted, which the UK abstained from, the UK was obliged, as the administering power, to cooperate with an institution that was established by the United Nations called the Palestine Commission. It was obliged to cooperate and allow this commission to enter Palestine to assist with the transfer of power, executive power, from the British to basically a Palestinian and a Jewish state, to the authorities in those states. But the UK opted to block the transfer of power. It did not allow the Palestine Commission to leave New York and arrive in Palestine. It allowed an advance party of a couple of people to come very late, just before the mandate, but then it walked off and left the mandate in a state of violence and chaos, in a state of war, after being repeatedly warned by members of the United Nations that if they left in this manner, chaos, violence, and starvation, in part, would ensue. And so when we talk about recognition, which is one of the issues listed as a key ask of one of the 5 issues listed as a key ask of the UK government, it's pretty obvious to me that the UK should recognise the state of Palestine. We heard Lord Soames of the video played earlier talking about the moral, historical responsibility the UK midwifed the birth of Israel, and now it needs to recognise the other states. I mean, in reality, the UK does. They'll never admit it publicly, but it does de facto implicitly recognize that Palestine is a state, at least since William Hague stood up in the House of Commons and said Palestine meets all the criteria stated in international law. This was in 2011. And then the following year, he said to President Abbas, that when they had the vote on observer statehood, said, well, the UK wants to vote in favor of this resolution, but if you don't do certain things, we will abstain. We won't vote against it, but we will abstain. And one of those conditions was that Palestine should not join the International Criminal Court. And that's something Palestine was not willing to say publicly. But the point is that only states can join the International Criminal Court. So the UK, by asking Palestine to refrain from joining the court, was implicitly recognizing that Palestine is a state. And I can go on and on and on. They've done several things since then. They haven't objected to Palestine's accession to treaties. They accepted as a depository Palestine's accession to the 8 UNESCO treaties. Even the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The UK, along with the Russian Federation and the United States, is a depository. That means Israel is to acknowledge and accept instruments of accession. Well, the Americans rejected it, or didn't even bother to respond because they don't think Palestine's a state. The Russians accepted it because they recognize Palestine as a state, and the UK accepted it. But apparently, we don't recognize Palestine as a state. So if you look at statements that the UK says, they basically say they view the act of recognition politically, and they will recognize Palestine at the right moment, but they never explain what the right moment is. And I would suggest the right moment is sooner than later. It should be unconditional and immediate. Otherwise, we'll end up with a state of, well, what we're seeing is genocidal acts in Gaza, especially given what Smotrich has just said 2 days ago, with Netanyahu calling up more troops, rotating troops from Lebanon to go and fight a further conflict in Gaza. In addition, what else can the UK do? It could call stop the war, call for a complete arms embargo, ban both exporting weapons and importing weapons. It could suspend these. I'm just going to go for a list of the things it could do. It could suspend trade agreements with Israel, focus on state institutions rather than individual settlers, which are not very effective. It could do more to support prosecutions of Israeli crimes at the International Criminal Court and domestically, including protecting its own barristers who have been named, possibly may face sanctioning from the Trump administration. I was pleased to see Raji discuss this case about dual nationals serving in Gaza where there's evidence they've committed crimes, hoping that the police will open an investigation. I also, just echoing what Raji has said, we need to end double standards. He spoke about the different reaction Ukraine compared to what's happening in Palestine. So the world welcomes the arrest warrants for Putin, but then wobbles when it comes to Benjamin Netanyahu, who's given, warm welcome in Hungary, which is a state party, and other states. I mean, this is very corrosive. This kind of double standards, which is everywhere, is very corrosive to the rule of law. I mean, another double standard is the UK's long-standing policy on humanitarian intervention. The UK is an outlier, I should say, on this, but some of you may recall that the UK has said in cases where there's grave humanitarian catastrophe in extreme, exceptional circumstances, it is lawful to employ armed force to prevent a grave situation from getting worse. You remember they made this argument in respect of Kosovo, Libya, and Syria before they lost the vote in the House. So again, another double standard. We talked about rebuilding trust. You can't rebuild trust if there are two standards, one for our friends and the rest of the world. So I mean, I'm as skeptical as everyone about whether about international law. I laughed, I chuckled to myself when Dalal, you said, your students ask you, do you believe what you teach anymore? Because I'm struggling with that. I teach international humanitarian law at the University of Nottingham. Thank God none of my students asked me that question. That's all I can say about that. But international law is important because if there is no law, there is just power. And we can't assume, the UK can't assume, that it's as powerful as it was a century ago. It has interests in different parts of the world. Do we really want to have a situation where countries can just roll in to other countries with tanks and planes because they perceive it as essential to their security interests? So we do need someone to speak out, to speak loudly, and to act where it's obvious that they should do so. And I'll end my comments there. Thank you.
I'm going to briefly just touch upon a couple of facts that everybody needs to focus on as well, besides ending the genocide that is ongoing for 19 months. Israel had used the trendy AI. Everybody's talking about artificial intelligence and the use of artificial intelligence. Israel had employed what they called gospel and lavender in identifying their targets in Gaza. So here I must warn that the ethical use of AI is under concern. The 2018 Jewish nation-state law should not be tolerated. If anything, it is only a label of racism for that state that is being recognized by the world. Not only against the Palestinians, but against the 2 million non-Jewish residents of Israel. let alone, of course, the recognition of Jerusalem that was done in the Trump's first era, which was unilateral, illegal, it contradicted different UN Security Council resolutions, but also it came in violation of the peace process itself and in violation to the world order and what the world's consensus on the two-state solution. The British mandate. The Brits have a historic responsibility, and we're not here to ask them for an apology. Yet, it's important that we realize that the mandate had laid out the structures and the foundations for the elimination of the Palestinian right to self-determination that we are witnessing today. So the least that they could do now is, first, to cease fire in Gaza and the West Bank, in all the Palestinian occupied territory, ending the Israeli military occupation, defining the border of the State of Israel, and recognizing the Palestinian state. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Sorry. I think, to begin with, there is imminent need, urgent need, top priority. Stop the onslaught, stop the genocide. That's, I mean, the first demand, I mean, should be addressed to the British government with all governments on earth. I think UK can play a real vital role in this regard. It cannot continue as such, just as simple. This is the first genocide war broadcasted live at the real time, and the whole world watch it. They cannot ignore it. I mean, this should stop immediately. Second, I cannot and will not accept that UK says, well, for us, this is self-defense. It cannot be self-defense. There is big wrong in this. And if they continue with this rhetoric, they are partners. They are legitimizing what's going on. They are giving Israel full political cover with that. Number three, there is an advisory opinion on 19th of July, 2024, given by the ICJ. And in it, they said, the occupation illegal. Now, this decision, or this advisory opinion, was adopted by the General Assembly, and they gave September this year, 1 year from the time it has been adopted, to end the Israeli occupation. I'm wondering, I mean, whether this is going to be respected or not. UK voted for that, as many other European countries. I hope this be taken and be implemented. Though, to the best of our knowledge, we have no clue what any European country did in this regard so far. Switzerland is the depository of the Geneva Convention. There was supposed to be a conference for the high contracting parties to activate Article 1 of the Convention, which make every signatory party of the Convention obliged to de jure implement the Geneva Conventions. It was scandalous and shameful that though Palestinians approached the Swiss government, and it was supposed to be convened upon the request of Palestine and many other states, more than 80 or 90 states, that the draft resolution doesn't speak about Israel in one word. And it's like academia, and that's why it was cancelled. It's shame again that the high contracting parties of the Geneva Convention, led by the Swiss government, fail in doing that. This is not a Swiss property. This is shared important conventions to protect civilians at the time of war, and that should be worked at to be convened and to make states stand with their responsibility. Finally, there is a British citizen, his name Karim Khan. He is the Attorney General of the ICJ, of the ICC. Karim Khan, subject to American sanctions, which President Trump issued in a presidential decree. He cannot, in his position, use his Visa card. He cannot pay the fees of his children at the school, and he cannot use his account. I'm talking about one item. Of course, they will not issue to him visa to US as part of the sanction. And when the Assembly of State Parties will convene in December, he definitely won't be able to travel there, as he said. If UK cannot protect its own citizen, who is supposedly the legal conscience of victims on earth in the most important case, and they backed him when they nominated him for this position, I think this will be one of the test cases. If they cannot protect their own citizen in ICC, they will not be able to protect international justice.
So we've got 25 minutes, and we've got a hard stop at 6:30 because Dalal literally has a plane to catch. But there is a reception in the Great Hall directly afterwards, so conversations can continue.
Yeah, so three people, we'll keep it to people we haven't heard from yet. Gentleman there, woman here, and here. Yes. I've got the mics here. If you take it to the gentleman, the woman, the gentleman, the middle there first. Over there, here with his hand up, and then. Yeah.
Thank you very much for a fascinating panel.
I think it's not on. We'll just flip something. Try again.
Thank you very much for a fascinating panel. The title is "What Can Britain Do?" We've heard of the spinelessness of our politicians over the last 100 odd years. So I think what can Britain do is barking up the wrong tree. Can I suggest we really need to be concentrating on what Britons can do? I think Raji's popular attack, well, not attack, taking the evidence to Scotland Yard, superb. What other parts of sort of civil society activity can we do, both people in this chamber and outside, in order to embarrass our government into complying with British values and the law of the land?
So please, yeah.
Back in Israel and Palestine, just a quick question on building trust. Can we build trust while both sides have leaders in place who've been there for 20 plus years?
And Mike's just making its way to the final question in this round. Please, thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I just want, I'm just basically asking the same question as my colleague, but I want to word it slightly differently. In Louis Theroux's recent documentary, the nasty lady, the secular lady, said, we compel Netanyahu to do, we give him strength, basically. We vote for him, and therefore he is answerable to us. What can we do to compel Keir Starmer and the government to listen to us and get what we need to stop this?
Thanks very much. Can I ask Victor and Zahira to answer the first question particularly on what Britons can do, and then maybe Dalal and Raji on the question of Palestinian leadership. Victor.
Can we bring back the mic?
Thank you very much. These are really good questions. What can UK citizens do since the UK has done nothing to embarrass our government, to abide by our values and the law of the land? And I think the last question is similar, reference to the Louis Theroux documentary about the settlers and the way in which they are somehow able to influence Netanyahu. How can we do the same? I guess it's to become more organized and to put more pressure on. I mean, I was talking in the coffee break with someone. I mean, one idea is to get more. What my reading of the political situation, I don't know how accurate this is. For example, let's take the issue of recognition of Palestine, is that there is broad support in Parliament for that, and even, I think, in some of the government departments. But there's a blockage at number 10. And so the question is, how do you put pressure on the Prime Minister? And I thought it was a novel idea was to get people to be more active in his constituency, because he's obliged to respond to them. So if any of you live in Sir Keir Starmer's constituency, it might be an idea to get a WhatsApp group or something and write to him a letter, or do a protest, do some demonstrations, or maybe organize a special, I don't know, group to focus on this issue. But I guess it's becoming more political. I mean, creating, maybe getting all the Palestinian groups that already exist to coordinate, work together more effectively as the anti-apartheid movement did. The Free Nelson Mandela campaign, especially in the 1980s, whether something similar can be done. Because there's a lot of good work being done in the UK, but it's being done by so many different groups. It would make more sense for them to. So maybe there needs to be an umbrella coordinating body to do this kind of work.
You have to let me some things to say. You're saying things that I need to say. No, I just wanted to touch upon this point as well. So living in the UK, we clearly witness day by day an incredible group of people who support Palestinian, and the public opinion, not just in the UK, but everywhere, is shifting towards Palestine. But I think we really need to become good at using consistent language. That's why the language of racialization and racism. It's not my favorite route, by the way. I would really love to continue to study what I was doing before. But I think there is need to create a language that is consistent. I mean, it's not possible that every time you say that you support Palestine, you are called an anti-Semite. It's just not possible. How on earth do I need to exist just in function of someone else? Who else in the world exists just in the function of the denial of someone else's existence? Think about the fake concept that has been created here. So we really need to become good at expressing this, and we need to do work in Parliament. So we need to, there is a petition, for example, about the definition of anti-Palestinian racism, which we could potentially, I haven't created that petition, but there is a petition about the exploration and definition of anti-Palestinian racism, which if it gets 10,000 signatures, then it's got to be discussed in Parliament. A lot of Palestinian, there are a lot of Palestine solidarity campaign. I've been invited to speak to a lot of them. They're doing a lot of really good work to do that. But somehow the Palestinian issue is seen as a radical issue. It's not. It's a human issue. In fact, Palestine is the zenith to humanity right now. It's showing us what humanity is about and what inhumanity is as well, and what dehumanization is. To really start to humanize, to show the beauty of the Palestinians, to speak up, not to be afraid, it's got to be a relentless process. And we all need to do this collectively in the West. It's the pressure in the West that will change the mind of our politicians and will then reflect on the territories. We have a huge responsibility. I don't know if I'm answering questions, but I hope so.
Should we move on to the question of Palestinian leadership?
So to answer the question on the Palestinian division and leadership, as a resident Palestinian, I do realize and acknowledge our internal setbacks. I do. We need to work on democratization, reform, and inclusion of women, youth, and many other things. And I really think it's a shame on Palestinians that we did not reach reconciliation and unity after 19 months of genocide. I cannot think of a reason that would keep us divided. Yet, a throwback to 2005 reminds me of what Sharon's aide, Dov Vice-Class, said then. While everybody was under the impression that the Israelis were liberating Gaza, Vice-Class said, we are doing a formaldehyde. They were counting the calories for the Palestinian residents of Gaza, and he basically said, and then Sharon, and now Netanyahu is reiterating publicly, that that was the only way to hinder any prospects or possibility for the two-state solution. It's a textbook of colonization. They knew very well that it is through the division and the sustainability of that division between the West Bank and Gaza, between Fatah and Hamas, and unfortunately the societies in the north and the south, that's how they make sure that no Palestinian state realize. That's how they make sure that they deprive the Palestinian people from the basic right of self-determination. So this is my answer to you. I really think it's a condition on all of us as Palestinians to work towards unity and reconciliation. However, we need to realize that this is a deliberate strategy that was empowered, enforced, and implemented on our grounds by the Israelis. Thank you.
I want to say personally, I don't like religious groups. I don't like those who say God gave us power of attorney and we represent him and we are the only people who can interpret what in God's mind. Having said that, I think whether we like it or not as the Palestinians, Hamas, part of us, part of our society, part of our people, and part of our legitimate resistance. We have no compromise on that. And this Palestinian vertical split, it's a big shame. And it shouldn't continue. And it should have an end. It's obvious and clear that there is veto, European, American, and on top of that, an Israeli, not to have Palestinian reconciliation. But always we say the leadership, which doesn't act according to the genuine national interest of their people, they are committing vital mistake and they are committing suicide. So we hope and pray that we as the Palestinians come with real national unity. And this shame of the Palestinian division has an end. The other point related to us as the Palestinians, I don't think it's human to be a good victim for genociders. A resistance, our right and obligation. Palestinian leadership decide about it. But we have to know we have no right to anybody to be good victims. Right of self-determination, like the Ukrainians, like any people on earth, gives you all the right to use all ways within the legal context and legitimacy in order to achieve your right of self-determination, independence, and to achieve justice and dignity for your people. You are asking me what to do. As people in UK, never ever I'll tell free committed people what to do. You are here, you are in the ground, we do our obligations. And to begin with, speaking truth to power. That's why we feel committed in coming here, telling you about the reality and what's going on. Once again, we are in the mid of the hill. This is what's going on, unprecedented. And this might lead to rule of jungle. This might lead to have Gaza as the grave of international law, international humanitarian law. And we promise you to invest our best to make Gaza and Palestine the test case of victory, of morality, of humanity, and rule of law.
This will have to be our last round. So many people, and people who haven't asked yet. I first, the person holding our microphone, our students, asked a question. These two gentlemen here and the woman at the back there, I think we'll have to stop at that. Four very, very short, 40 seconds each maximum. Yeah, first.
I just very quickly wanted Victor to elaborate on what he said earlier about the UK and international humanitarian law down in this corner. I overheard it because I was running around with the mic, but I'm not sure the entire audience did, and I believe it was quite relevant to the discussion on the rule of law and the UK undermining it.
Thank you. Okay. Here and then here and then.
I'm one of the few Jews here, and I'm a rabbi. And I notice and am amazed, but so moved by the fact that the Britain-Palestine project has as its subtitle, Peace with Justice, Security, and Equal Rights for Israelis and Palestinians. Because it's the only basis that I can believe in that has a hopeful potential future. Maybe not quickly, but there are 7 million or so Israelis and 7 million or so Palestinians, many of whom are not going to leave. So what I want to ask, suggest, hope, because I do think the Britain-Palestine project is a very important part of influence in this country, is whether there are quite a lot of many Jews and a lot of Jewish organizations which totally are in sympathy with what's going on here in this country. I wonder whether the next time we need to have a meeting at which there are, I don't care whether it's an equal number, probably there should be 2/3 Palestinians and 1/3 Jews who are prepared then to go forward and work together. And I wonder what the panel think of such a suggestion.
Good idea. A lot of Jewish people come on the marches. We're talking about embargoes and so on from the West on Israel and so on. But sadly, the Arab world is not doing anything for us Palestinians. okay? We still got flights from Tel Aviv to the UAE. Egypt and Jordan should be cutting off relationships. I really think the Arab world has to, you know, get its act together.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the excellent suggestions. I'm sure, like many in this room, I've been racking my brains about the way forward and how we can not only end the terrible suffering, but lead to a long-term solution. And I was interested with the apartheid comparison and the free Nelson Mandela. And I wonder why there isn't more noise about freeing Marwan Barghouti, because the more I read, he seems to have support across Gaza, across the West Bank, very widely. And I would have thought that we could have a strong case in trying to get him released, so Palestinians have a really strong leader whom they mostly support.
Thank you.
Well, I think I'd like to give each of you a chance to have a final word and respond to the idea of, well, Victor, to explain what you were saying about international law and about the meeting, joint meeting between Jewish people and Palestinian people here, that the Arab world should do more and free Marguerite.
Okay, I'll just answer the first question, which was directed to me. So the point I was making, I think, is that the UK is an outlier in their interpretation of Article 1 of the 4 Geneva Conventions, under which the high contracting parties undertake to respect and to ensure respect for the present convention in all circumstances. So my understanding is the UK doesn't see, of course they should respect the convention, but it's not their policy to ensure that other states respect the convention as well. So then I think there's a positive duty to go beyond simply what they're required to do under the convention.
So I just want to speak quickly about the Arab world, although I think that my colleagues are potentially better positioned than me, being in the Arab world themselves. But when I hear the Arab world, I feel a little bit, we are undergoing a little bit of an Orientalist process of thinking. The Arab world doesn't mean anything if not just the Western world. You know, I mean, it's a very big place with a lot of people with a lot of interests. Just think about how the European countries are recognizing Palestine one by one, and the infights and political, bridges that they need to cross in order to deliver their recognition. The Arab world has the same level of granularity and different interests. I think that it would be great if the Arab world was more united about Palestine, but I also think that wanting them to be united is a little bit of a Orientalist wishful thinking from their perspective, so something that we want to keep in check. Regarding the apartheid, I think that one of the demands that we have here was about just peace. And we are so many light years away from it now. We are so many light years away from a just peace. But in terms of envisioning a future, which is what we need to do if we want to be strategically optimist, the apartheid route is a very important route because it links into, first of all, a language that we already have, second, to a legal system that we already have, third, to this process of racialization of which I've already spoken. So there is a lot of pieces of the jigsaw that could come together nicely around the idea of overcoming an apartheid. And how was the apartheid overcome in South Africa? Through a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And what is a Truth and Reconciliation Commission? And I've taken some note about this today because I looked at it this morning. It's an approach to justice that aims to repair the harm done to the victims. The goal is to give the victims an active place in the process. And, you know, even if we have two states, there needs to be a process of reconciliation and reconstruction and rebuilding the trust. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Well, on the Arab world, I think we need to admit and realize the fact that this is a Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Despite the fact that Trump is now shifting the narrative, and he is actually taking us back to the long Arab-Israeli conflict, but under the framework of his normalization agreements. In diplomacy, which I'm an expert in, I have to say that bilateral relations are free. So the Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, anybody can go and sign whatever agreements with Israel. They can go to the moon with Israel. Okay, they can bring whatever high-tech technologies with Israel. But they cannot claim that they are signing those Abrahamic Accords for the sake of liberating the Palestinians. And they cannot claim that they are signing those accords to stop annexation. Because on the ground, despite the fact that normalization agreements took place 4 years ago, annexation is going de facto. And very soon it will be de jure on the ground. However, we need to be reminded that the Arabs actually proposed the Arab Peace Initiative back in 2002. But it was the Israelis who never cared about even responding, let alone rejecting that deal. Not only the Arab states would have normalized with Israel then, but all the Arab and Islamic states, more than 57 countries. Imagine normalizing agreements between Israel and all Arab and Islamic states back in 2002. The Arab Peace Initiative is still withstanding, and Saudi Arabia is trying again. My fear is really that multilateralism and diplomacy is taking us into a procrastination strategy, which is a Machiavellian textbook, of where we're just buying more and more time for annexation and for confiscations that supports the Israeli military occupation. It's a responsibility on our own, but I think we as Palestinians need to take agency and leadership. Marwan Barghouti, we also need to know that Marwan's name was one on the first on the list, on the second batch of the Palestinian prisoners who were supposed to be released in March, hadn't Netanyahu put a halt to the ceasefire agreement. And why did he do that? Because Netanyahu knows very well that he is only concerned about his short-term successes and wins in Israel and his political career. Had he cared about the strategic existence of Israel in the Middle East, had he cared about security and peace for the Israelis before the Palestinians, he would be the first one to be releasing Marwan Barghouti. Because in the Palestinian eyes, Marwan Barghouti is the one and only personality who could be trusted by the Palestinians from the right and the left, and in selling a peace negotiated agreement. Had there been a serious will by the Israelis, by the international community, I think they would be easily releasing Marwan. However, the status quo is very comforting to everybody in the leadership, whether in the region, in Israel, in Palestine, or in the international community. On the Jewish voices, I honestly think that the Jewish voices count more than my voice. When they speak power, when they speak justice, I really would love the Israelis who are protesting on a weekly basis for the democratic reform of Israel to be holding more signs asking for the ending of the Israeli military occupation, talking about the rights of the Palestinian people. That's how I think we can counter Zionism. That's how we can counter military occupation, apartheid, genocide, war crimes, and the insanity of this state-organized terror called Israel. Thank you.
I do fully agree that the release of Marwan al-Barghouti will make a landmark in the issue of Palestinian political division. I'm sure after his release, few days, this will be concluded and there will be no Palestinian division. Because we need such leadership who are loyal to the cause, to the people, and who can put all the reasons to make our struggle on the right path. Unity, it's a must. And I'm assuring you that any coming deal, Marwan, Saadat, Abdullah Barghouti will be out. And I hope, this is something happen at the foreseeable future, and we succeed in putting an end for this shameful Palestinian political division. Second, right now we have a very, very hard situation. In the last 19 months, Israel tried everything they can. Everything. They didn't restrain themselves from anything. So people faced death 100 times a day. They faced starvation. They faced displacement. They have very little to survive with, but never ever they lost hope. I think you can count on Palestinian people, and you can count on their resilience, and you can count on their resistance for the occupation. I'm 70. I lived all my life one-way ticket in Gaza. I choose to be in Gaza. My family there, 7 centuries in Gaza, Palestine. Until today, a resident of Gaza. I'm a resident. My residency not decided neither by Hamas or by Palestinian Authority. My residency decided by Israel. By those who came before 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 or 60 years. C'est unfair. We are the stones of the valley. We have been there since ever. We will continue there forever. We are in the right side of history, and we have just the right cause. We are strong enough to face this injustice. But we are much more stronger with the support of free, committed people across the globe. Keep the solidarity, keep the support. Together, we shall overcome. Thank you.
We're going to draw things to the close because there's no point and impossible to follow those words. I've got a very long list of things that have come out of today, and we will review them and we will work with them to add to our action plans, and we will circulate both the record of this meeting and our action plan for campaigning over the year. So would you join me first in thanking all the speakers on this panel? And throughout the day. And I'm just going to hand over to Anton Matar.
Could I just introduce Antoine Matar, who is the chair of the Palestine-Britain Business Council.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm probably the oldest amongst you here. As a Palestinian, I'm extremely grateful to the Britain-Palestine Project and its Board of Trustees for all the work they have done to try to put Palestine on the map in the UK. And this, to me, is music to my ear. And thank you very much.